In 1991, when Ukraine declared independence, it inherited the world's third largest nuclear arsenal, more warheads than Britain, France, and China combined. This wasn't random. It was a chain reaction. How did a vast, mostly flat country in the heart of Europe become the chessboard for today's most dangerous security gamble? The real turning point for NATO's future is not where most people expect. It comes in Act 3, after the world starts paying attention. By the end, you will understand why Ukraine's fate could redraw Europe's map and decide the credibility of the entire alliance. Stay with us. In Act 3, we will show the single decision that set the rest of the story in motion. For centuries, Ukraine's landscape has been a frontier where empires collided and borders shifted. In the 17th century, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and the Ottoman Empire vied for control over its fertile plains, each leaving traces in the towns and fortresses that dot the region. By the late 18th century, the Russian Empire absorbed much of this territory, redrawing the map of Eastern Europe and setting the stage for future struggles. Under Soviet rule, Ukraine became an industrial powerhouse and a linchpin of military might. Soviet rocket forces, including intercontinental ballistic missiles and strategic bombers, were stationed deep in Ukrainian soil, making the republic a core pillar of Moscow's nuclear deterrent. A historian notes that Ukraine's status as a borderland gave it a unique identity, never fully European, never entirely Russian, always a crossroads. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Ukraine's independence referendum passed with overwhelming support, and the country inherited not only its own future but also the world's third-largest nuclear arsenal. This new reality created a deliberate buffer between Russia and NATO, reducing the risk of direct confrontation between the world's major powers. The logic of the buffer state was not accidental. It was the product of centuries of contest and compromise, with each handover layering new fears and ambitions onto the land. Empires have come and gone, but the structural importance of Ukraine as a zone of strategic depth remains. The choices made after 1991 would test whether this buffer could hold, or whether geography would once again become destiny. Ukraine's terrain is strikingly flat. Close to 90% of its landmass is open plains, stretching from the Russian border in the east toward the Carpathian foothills in the west. This openness is not just a detail on a map, it shapes how armies move and how borders are defended. The Dnieper River, running north to south, divides the country almost in half. It acts as a natural barrier, but only in certain places. Most of the riverbanks are low and wide, offering few choke points that could slow an advancing force. Bridges and crossings become critical assets, and their loss can split defensive lines in two. Unlike countries shielded by mountains or dense forests, Ukraine offers little natural cover. The Carpathian Mountains in the far west provide some protection, but they shield only a narrow strip near the border with Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary. The rest of the country is exposed: fields, steppe, and rolling hills that favor mechanized units and rapid movement. In military simulations, an army can cover the 500 kilometers from eastern Ukraine to the Polish border in days, not weeks, if left unchecked. Quick recap: flat land means speed, and that speed forces hard choices about deployment and timing. This geography transforms Ukraine from a distant neighbor into a corridor. Whoever controls these plains holds the key to Central Europe's security. The land itself becomes leverage, turning static features into active lines of risk. For NATO, the challenge is not only about supporting a partner, it is about managing a landscape where distance offers little comfort and speed can decide the fate of capitals. Up next, we examine how that corridor reshapes alliance, deterrence, and defense planning. After the Cold War, NATO's doors did not swing open without rules. Each round of enlargement followed a process shaped by member requests and formal agreements. In 1999, Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic joined after years of partnership programs and reforms. The 2004 wave brought in the Baltic states, Slovakia, Slovenia, Bulgaria, and Romania. These accessions were neither automatic nor imposed. They were the result of sovereign decisions by countries seeking security guarantees and alignment with Western norms. But NATO's own commitments placed boundaries on what expansion could mean. The 1997 NATO-Russia Founding Act, signed in Paris, stated that NATO had no intention, no plan, and no reason to deploy nuclear weapons or permanent substantial combat forces on the territory of new members. This was more than diplomatic language. It was a written assurance designed to address Russian concerns about encirclement and to preserve the right of states to choose their alliances. A military analyst observes that those clauses were drafted with deliberate ambiguity. Permanent basing was off the table, but rotational deployments and exercises remained possible. The Founding Act also created the NATO-Russia Council to promote dialogue and transparency even as new members joined. This approach made enlargement a managed process, balancing the aspirations of Eastern European states with the political reality of Russian objections. Quick recap. Enlargement was voluntary, conditional, and constrained by legal and political limits. Each new accession required unanimous consent from existing members, ratification in national parliaments, and the fulfillment of military and democratic standards. The process was slow, deliberate, and bounded by legal and political constraints. Those limits would soon become a source of friction, and that friction would shape how NATO and Russia interpreted the future of European security. What followed from that clash of interpretations would set the stage for a decisive turning point in the story. NATO and Russia view the same events through sharply different lenses. After the Cold War, NATO expanded eastward, offering stability to countries that requested protection. Each new member joined by choice, seeking to secure borders and align with Western political and military norms. In Moscow, those moves looked like a steady advance toward Russian frontiers, shrinking the buffer that had separated Russian forces from the rest of Europe for generations. Vladimir Putin has repeatedly called NATO presence near Russia borders an existential threat, citing historical grievances and security anxieties. This divide is not only about territory, it is about the rules that underpin European order. After the Soviet collapse, the Budapest Memorandum of 1994 affirmed Ukraine's borders in exchange for giving up nuclear weapons. The principle was clear. Borders in Europe are not to be changed by force. When Russian troops seized Crimea in 2014 and later pushed into eastern Ukraine, that principle came under direct attack. The international response, sanctions, military aid, and diplomatic condemnation was as much about defending that principle as about defending land. Quick recap. Two narratives, two logics. NATO frames expansion as stability and voluntary choice. Russia frames the same moves as strategic encroachment and a direct threat. For NATO, the issue is credibility. If a promise to respect borders can be broken without consequence, the entire security order weakens. For Russia, the expansion of Western influence is perceived as a direct threat to its own security, a consequence that can motivate forceful responses. The decision to expand led to the consequence that Russia felt constrained, and that perception produced escalation. Those steps created a dangerous feedback loop that raises the risk of miscalculation. Each side believes it is acting defensively, yet every move is read as escalation by the other. The struggle over Ukraine has become a test of whether the rules that have held since the end of the Cold War can survive new pressures, or whether force will again decide borders in Europe. Next, we will trace how these competing narratives shaped concrete policy choices on both sides and reveal the turning point most observers miss. NATO's response to the war in Ukraine has relied on a vast network of support, running from Brussels to logistics hubs across Europe. The alliance coordinated billions of euros in non-combat aid through the NATO Security Assistance and Training for Ukraine program, streamlining everything from ammunition shipments to advanced drone parts. In 2024 alone, allies delivered over 50 billion euros in equipment, training, and intelligence, supporting more than 100,000 Ukrainian troops. A quick recap: massive resources flowed quickly, and they mattered. On the battlefield, Ukrainian units adapt quickly, using commercial drones for frontline surveillance and electronic warfare to jam enemy signals. Within months, tactics tested in Ukraine, like first-person view drone strikes and rapid electronic countermeasures, began appearing in NATO training manuals. These lessons are not theory. They reshape how member states plan, equip, and fight. The pipeline of aid is more than a lifeline. It is a real-time laboratory where alliance credibility is measured by the speed of adaptation. Next, we will trace how those battlefield signals altered deterrence across NATO's eastern flank. Within weeks of the invasion, NATO doubled its battle groups along the eastern flank, sending thousands of troops to Poland, Romania, Slovakia, and the Baltic states. That decision changed the alliance's posture overnight, shifting it from symbolic reassurance to a forward presence intended to deter further aggression. Quick recap. The deployment was a clear decision with an immediate consequence, a new forward posture and a higher threshold for escalation. At the same time, European supply chains buckled. Russian attacks on Ukrainian rail lines and Black Sea ports blocked critical grain exports. Sabotage and pipeline disruptions sent gas prices soaring. In 2022, European natural gas prices peaked at over €300 per megawatt hour, triggering inflation rates not seen in decades. An energy specialist noted that every shipment delayed in Odessa or Mykolaiv rippled through European factories and households, exposing how security and economic stability are now inseparable. The sudden deployment of troops and the scramble for alternative energy sources revealed that the consequences of conflict in Ukraine are measured not only in military terms, but in the daily cost of living for millions across the continent. What this set in motion is a feedback loop of deterrence, economic shockwaves, and political pressure, a dynamic we will follow to its strategic tipping point. Right now, NATO's credibility is measured not just in treaties, but in how it responds to Ukraine's fate. The world is watching whether borders remain negotiable or non-negotiable. As alliances are tested in real time, the rules written here will echo far beyond Europe. What happens next matters everywhere.